Hi everyone. Today we are going to do the analysis of Maharashtra MBA CET 2026 7th April afternoon slot. So overall, if you see, it is the fourth slot this year. Paper pattern is concerned, there are no surprises in the terms of paper pattern. They had mentioned this paper pattern in their CD notification, and the same paper pattern was in an actual exam also. That is logical reasoning 75 questions, abstract reasoning 25 questions, quantitative aptitude 50 questions, verbal ability and reading comprehension 50 questions. Okay, now here every question carries 1 mark, so total 200 questions, 200 marks. So as far as the interface was concerned, you can check that there were, you can actually what I'm saying, there was a drop down menu through which you can actually select the section. So you can decide the order of the section in which you want to attempt the paper. So basically from any section you can attempt the any question. That was a part. However, the slight problem which is observed in every part is that on right hand side, when you have these questions visible, number 1, number 2, number 3, your question information and question in option and question information window gets slightly minimized. So there was an arrow. If you click on that arrow, this question portion will get hide. So on the full screen, you'll be able to see the data of the question and options of the question also. So I will suggest the students who are going to attempt for the further slots or who are going to give a second attempt, please do that part, because that will save the efforts of scrolling left, right, up and down. I think that will not save the efforts of scrolling up and down, but left, right efforts are definitely saved. And that up and down scrolling is required most probably in the RC part only. In the other question, there was no up and down scrolling required. So most of the question, the scrolling was left to right. So if you do this setting, then it will be easier for you to answer the questions. You don't have to worry about the scrolling that left to right part. Fine. Now, as paper pattern, there are no surprises. 2 hours 30 minutes, 5 options for each question. You can attempt any question from any section. So what could have been the order of the sections? That is the individual choice. But considering the level of difficulty, the order of the sections could have been, the number 1 could be the abstract reasoning section, because when your mind is fresh, you can handle those questions well. The second section could be logical reasoning or quantitative aptitude, depending upon which is your strong area. So students who are good in quant, I would have suggested them the second part, because there were many 1-line, 2-line questions. By just reading the information, you could have answered the questions. Logical reasoning questions were easy, but you need to work on the questions. So this could have been the third section if your quant is strong. Otherwise, you can swap this. So quant is third and logical reasoning second, and fourth could have been VRC. Okay, or in between also VRC. Some people say VRC could have been, those who are not so good in quant, they could have attempted VRC first and quant at the last. So that is a personal choice. But what could have been the ideal time limit for this? Considering this paper difficulty level, the suggested time limit would have been, let's say, abstract reasoning, you can actually give 20-25 minutes to attempt the whole section. If you try to skip the questions which are time consuming, so out of 25 questions, the 20 questions were straightforward. You just look at the question, you don't need to draw the figures or something like that. Work on the that figures given, you'll easily get the answer. There were around 5 questions where you need to actually think to get the answer properly. So 20-25 minutes for that. Quantitative aptitude time will vary, because those are good at quant. They have done all the basic concepts, the standard types of question. They know percentages well, ratios well, time and work basics well. They could have attempted actually that entire section in 35 minutes. Okay, that I'll suggest 35 to 40 minutes. So I will suggest a good time would have been, still, if you, even if I consider on the higher side, this would have taken a 40 minutes part. Logical reasoning might have consumed around 55 to 60 minutes if you try to attempt easiest questions and skipping the questions where the lengthy part is there. And VRC section could have taken around 30-35 minutes. No issues in this part. So this is around your overall breakup of the time limit. So order of the section you can choose as per your convenience. Fine. Now let's go to the analysis of individual sections. Now, as far as the difficulty level is concerned, logical reasoning I'll categorize as easy to moderate. Abstract reasoning was easy to moderate. Quantitative ability will be easy to moderate. VARC I will classify as a moderate to difficult because the vocab part or the grammar part was tricky. I'll not say difficult, but vocab part was slightly difficult. That's what students have reported. So somebody is good at vocab, okay, this section would have become a moderate for them. Those who are not so good at vocab, then that portion would have been difficult for the students. Fine, that is how I'll categorize the difficulty level. Now let's go section by section part. Now logical reasoning, total breakup, if I categorize like this: analytical puzzles only 9 questions, analytical reasoning 66 questions, verbal and critical reasoning no questions at all, 0 questions. Now, being this 0 question, probably your accuracy will go higher because verbal reasoning, critical reasoning questions involves a lot of reading, and also accuracy is a problem in those kind of questions. So being those questions absent, probably the accuracy in these sections for the students will go high. Second thing is, if you look at the analytical puzzles, I'll go to the analytical puzzles and then I'll comment on that. If I look at the analytical puzzles part, there were 4 questions on linear arrangement, 3 questions on circular arrangement, 2 questions on comparison. Now all these questions were the single questions, individual questions. I think one of the circular arrangement set had 2 questions. Otherwise all the questions were the single questions. No issues. There was no quant based reasoning question. There were no games and tournaments questions also. No distribution questions also. Only these questions. The only issue was the couple of questions in this analytical puzzles were wrong. Means you make the arrangement, you use the conditions whatever they have given, you realize that you are not able to make the arrangements. Also, the amount of reading required to considering just one question on each data, the amount of reading required is higher, hence the time consumed is higher. So what could have happened that many students might have got stuck over here, that they solve after reading that information with some 30-40 seconds, they must have got one arrangement, they listed down those conditions and they realize, okay, I'm not able to get the arrangement. Okay, then we realize that some of the questions, the question can be solved with some assumptions. So for example, if I say generally we said statement, if B is between A and C, we don't assume that they are a consecutive position. So B is between A and C, B could be anywhere between A and C. It's not necessarily that 3 positions are consecutive. But some of the questions for solving, you need to do those assumptions that okay, between B is between A and C means A, B, C are consecutive positions. Fine. So I'm not sure whether should I assume and then answer the question, because how they are going to give the key once they release the response sheet, how they are going to give the correct key, that will matter. Okay, so couple of questions were wrong in this part, couple of questions with assumption you could have solved. So slightly there was a waste of time, I'll say. I'll not say time consuming, it's a waste of time because you are not getting the answer, you are reading the information again. So the correct would have been the for the future, you can keep in mind, you get stuck in somewhere whether you feel the information is wrong, don't worry too much about that, because what CET will do about that wrong question you don't know. Whether they will allot the marks for the people who are attempted or will they scrap the question, we don't know that part. So better you leave that question and go ahead, mark something and go ahead. Is that okay? So we basically you have marked something, even if they are going to scrap that question, nothing to worry. As you are marked, and if they allot the marks for that question, you will get 1 mark for that because you attempted something for that question. Fine. So that was the only problem here. Otherwise, the nature of the questions was very simple. There were no complicated part in these analytical puzzles part. So analytical puzzles part, not being the set based question, all individual questions, that is actually giving you the extra time to attempt the more questions from the logical reasoning area. And also that will improve on the accuracy part also. Because many times even you attempted a set for 5-7 minutes, you are not sure whether you will get all 5 questions correct or not, because you are not sure whether that final arrangement is prepared or not. So here individual questions were easy and accuracy is going to be high with some assumptions and some questions wrong here. Okay, but logical reasoning sections you will get a more time to attempt, and there your accuracy will improve, number of attempts will also go up. So logical reasoning, this analytical reasoning part, I actually like this part, because they cover generally as a CD syllabus whatever typical types of question I prepare. So as a CD student, when you prepare for that CD syllabus, those all types of questions were present. So you don't have to really too much think about okay, oh, this is a different type of questions. So there is no wastage of time in reading the instructions part. However, there are certain types of questions which were not asked. So let's first work on the types of questions which are not asked. So no questions from input output, clocks. There was a question on clocks in abstract reasoning, but not in logical reasoning part. Then calendars, okay, Venn diagrams, no question. Cubes and dice, there were some questions in the abstract reasoning area, but not in the logical reasoning section. Fine. So these are the areas there were the missing questions. But can you see here the very high weightage for the series questions? Okay. So approximately there were 10 questions purely based on the number series questions. Now number series question, I'll say half the questions easy, half the questions were tricky. Okay. So I'll not say difficult, but yes, for some questions a considerable amount of trial and error is required. You try this logic, that's not working out. You try something else, that is working out. So 2-3 different logic you have to try, and then the pattern is formed. Okay. So that weightage, if you look at that weightage, is very, very high over here. Fine. Next is, if you look at analogies. Okay, analogies, there were 5 questions. Okay. Now here, the problem here in these analogies question, these questions were the word based analogies. So actually these were not logic based part. It was again the vocab based part was there. So if you know the meaning of those words, then you can categorize them as easy. If you don't know the meaning of those words, you will categorize them as difficult. I will categorize this portion as a difficult for an average student who is not so good in vocab. Odd man out questions, I will say again a tricky questions, because see, in a flow of exam, you read something, you mark some answer, and you come out. You feel you answer it correctly, but when your final answer key is out, you realize you may not have marked the correct answer. So odd man out, I'll say the questions were tricky; they were not so straightforward. The other areas, which are the other areas? That is direction sense, that is easy. 5 questions were there. I'll say one question. There were some questions there. We see normal direction sense questions involve what? You are traveling towards north, south in this 4 direction. But there are a couple of questions where they are talking about the southeast, southwest kind of thing also. So I will say direction sense questions were overall an easy part. Okay. Then symbols and notations part, these are easy questions, but time consuming, because they mention something. Symbols and notations, a lot of categories are considered. So some tricky part was there. I'll not say tricky part, but it's a time consuming part. Coding, decoding, I will say some questions are like that, where to verify your logic there is no extra information given. So they give you something is coded as so and so. You crack that logic, but is your logic correct? I required one more data for that. So in some question that data was missing. So for those questions, you have to assume that your logic is correct. You have to mark the answer. Blood relation questions were straightforward, I'll say. In fact, some questions were of the repetitive nature. Fine. Word and sequence forming. Okay. Now these questions, if you're a time student, in our miscellaneous handout, we have covered these questions. But I will say not all the questions were easy. Though I know the meaning of all the 5 words they have given, it's still a challenging part in some couple of questions to form that sequence. I am assuming that whatever sequence I form is correct, but that may not be the right part. So here people may suffer in the accuracy part. They may not waste too much time in solving the question, but accuracy may suffer over here. Deductions, very, 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 very easy questions. Okay, you just draw the normal Venn diagrams and you'll get the answers. So you don't need to worry too much about it. Now, data sufficiency is a problem. Problem in the sense, though these data sufficiency questions are asked in analytical reasoning section or logical reasoning section, these all the 4 questions on data sufficiency were based on logic part. See, in the con part, there were no data sufficiency questions. So that I'm thinking this way, that they are categorizing data sufficiency as a pattern in a reasoning part. So under that, they're asking the con part also. So out of these 4 questions, I'll say 3 questions were 2 statement based, 1 was a 3 statement based. But if you look at the questions, Again, those who are very good at quant, very good, I'll say those who are basic concept of quant are clear. They know how to solve the standard types of question. They could have easily got this 4 out of 4 correct. Otherwise, the accuracy may be a problem for few students, those who's conceptually not clear in those topics. Miscellaneous area, you can see there are 6 questions from the miscellaneous area. Okay, so cubes and dice, there were no questions in the analytical reasoning section, but in the abstract reasoning part, there are some questions on it. Fine. So like that, total 66 questions from the analytical reasoning area. Is that okay? So that's a very good weightage, and student have to do a smart choice of questions. For example, there are certain type of question where you have to just follow the instruction and get the answer. But you have to understand doing that may consume more than a minute, and there were certain questions which you could have easily solved less than 30 seconds. Okay. Also, if you look at the average time taken for these questions will vary from 45 seconds to 1 minute part. So questions were very straightforward in nature. Many times you have to just follow the instructions. How fast you do that part, the speed will matter a lot. So those who have taken a regular mock CETs, okay, they have followed regular online sectional tests, they will end up attempting the more questions that compared to the people who did not practice a lot. It is not like something a person A and B cannot solve. Both two people A and B can solve these questions, but speed matters, and that will come from the practice. Fine. Next part. In this, no questions on verbal or critical listening. Not a single assumption, conclusion, nothing. Total 0 weightage in this part. So 9 questions from analytical puzzles, but single questions, only one set of 2 questions, and all remaining 66 questions were analytical reasoning, no verbal and critical listening part. Let's move to the abstract reasoning part. Now, abstract reasoning, again, I put it this way: if you are a time student, we have covered series, analogies, and one miscellaneous handout, also odd man out, analogy, and miscellaneous handout. So if you have solved those 4 different types of handouts, I think you should have been able to manage all these types of questions, because we have covered these questions in those handouts. Okay, only the missing tile completion, this was a slightly different, but this is a repetitive questions. We had covered this kind of question in our workshops also. Okay, now here I just want to tell you that counting the polygon, there were only 3 questions. If you're trying to count them manually, it could have consumed more time. But as there were no question as for the questions of counting the number of triangles, it was all counting the number of squares, number of rectangles, or something like that. Okay, so in this case, if you have used the concepts of permutations and combination, those who know how to count the number of squares, how to get the number of rectangles for permutation combinations, then you could have answered these questions easily rather than the manual counting. Okay, so rest of the questions were manageable, but out of 25 questions, I feel you could have got a 20 correct. There were 5 questions which were slightly tricky in nature, or 2 questions were something like that. Even after you're thinking for a lot of time, you're not able to guess what is the correct logic over here. Okay, or so 2-3 questions I find like that you cannot answer the question even after spending 2 or 3 minutes on that. So I'll say out of 25, 20 correct could have been a great score over in this section. Fine. So in the terms of types of question, except this missing tile completion, which is actually a repetitive question, means it was asked in the past from 3-4 years back, other types of questions were all standard types of questions. So those who have solved the time handouts, they were all familiar with these type of questions. Quantitative aptitude. Now here, when I spoke to students, I got the mixed review. Some students said the section was moderate, some students say the section was easy, even some students say, sir, we were as it is not good in quant, so we solved good amount of questions, but it was time consuming for that because they were taking too much time for solving the question because their quant basics are not so clear or strong, I'll say, not clear. Okay, so I'll say the mixed review. A well prepared student, I put it this way, I say a well prepared student who have done all the concepts in these quant areas. We have practiced at least 30 questions from each area, that student will find these quantitative ability sections easy. But important is how many questions he'll be able to attempt, and second is at what speed he'll be able to attempt. So students who have already prepared for CAT and done these topics of these kind of topics and much deeper level, probably their speed will be higher for solving the questions. Okay, so when I just give the breakup of that, out of these 40 questions, 50 questions, 10 questions were of data interpretation. So the strategy could have been, if you want to attempt all 50, you can do that part. That would have taken 35 to 40 minutes for a good student. But if you feel, okay, some of the areas I'm not strong enough, then probably students who are good at percentages, means they know the percentages basics well, how to find a percentage increase, A is what percentage of B, okay, they know how to find the averages. All those students probably, instead of doing some difficult questions, I'll not say difficult question, but conceptual questions from Con, they could have done the DI part, those 10 questions, because they would have got more questions correct from that, because there was nothing in DI which was difficult part. So let me give the breakup of these 40 questions. This is the first slide. I show you the breakup on the second slide. Look at, I have mentioned simple equation as 0 over here. Some student can say there were some questions on simple equation. If they solve those questions using equations, for example, ratio based questions, if I solve using the equation, you can count them as a simple equations. Otherwise, purely equation based questions were not there, 0. Simple equations, special equation, no questions. Ratio based 3 questions, percentage 2 questions, profit and loss 3 questions, partnership 2 questions. Okay, simple interest, compound interest 2 questions, time and work surprisingly 5 questions, time and distance 4 questions. So here I can see time and work, time and distance together is just 9 questions. Averages 3 questions, mixtures and allegation 1 question. Now again, I don't want to go into individual questions, or but all were of easy to moderate level. It matters that how you solve the questions. For example, ratio questions, one could have solved using making the equations, but as far as some good student feedback, they said ratio questions, there was no equations required. Using the normal ratio properties, you could have solved those questions. Fine. Then other areas, if I look at, okay, simplification, there were 2 questions. Okay, numbers basics 6 question, and numbers as it is slightly higher weightage every time. So compared to regular weightage, the numbers is for a lesser weightage over here, 6 and to 8 questions only. Geometry, there was 1 question, mensuration 1 question, permutation combination 1 question, probability 1 question. Okay, so again, all these kind of questions, for example, permutation combination questions, probability questions, they were all, if you know the basics of that topic, I'll categorize. Somebody has not done permutation combination at all, for him it's a difficult question. But somebody has done basics of permutation combination, these all were easy in nature. Okay, no questions on sequence series, no questions on heights and distances. Identity based, there was 1 question, which is very easy. Okay, so overall easy to moderate, I will suggest as a question. But instead of attempting all 40 questions, whether you find there is a time consuming part, you could have left those questions and you could have attempted the DI part. Now when I talk about the DI part, both DI set 1, DI set 2, both the sets were easy. But if I say which one is if I want to do the comparison, I'll say the people who are good at percentages basics, they understand what is percentages. Okay, they could have done that bar graph, pie chart set first and then bar graph set. For them, pie chart is a lesser calculations if they understand the basics of percentages well. Bar graph, there were no percentage basics required. It's more about addition, taking a ratio, then finding the A is what percentage of B kind of questions. So again, compared to few con questions, it is worth doing these 10 questions of DI. That's what I will suggest for this particular slot. No issues. Let's move to the last section, that is a verbal ability and reading comprehension. Now, as far as the feedback from the students I got, that the first part was your VA part, verbal ability part, that is the vocab and grammar part, and second part was the reading comprehension. So all RC passages were together. Okay, in fact, in quant section also you realize that okay, all arithmetic questions were at the start and all other areas questions were somewhere at the end. Now again, that feedback is may vary person to person, but in one of the slots, one of the students' feedback is that those questions were together. Similarly, VA questions were all together, RC questions were at the end. So what could be the good strategy? I'll show you the vocabulary 21 questions. Now here, please understand, those who are good at this area, vocabulary, can I say it's a less time consuming and I'll say more rewarding. Okay, but those who are poor, I'll say weak, not so strong, for them you have to just read, think, do I know the meaning of this particular word? Not only what, for example, there's a questions given, a word given for which you have to find a synonyms. So not only that word was difficult word, in fact the options given were also the difficult. So many students said that okay, they talked about the synonyms, antonyms, but I did not know the meaning of the word they asked, and I did not know the meaning of the few of the words from the options also. So for them the vocabulary become a difficult part. Okay. However, the students who are very good at vocab, they said so this was a what I'm saying, a rewarding area for them, but it consume a lesser time and they got a more accurate questions also. Fine. So 21 questions, grammar 9 questions, no verbal ability, parajumble kind of questions, reading comprehension there were 20 questions, total 50 questions. Fine. So how I should have attempted this? You're not sure about your vocab accuracy, you should have attempted the RC part. Okay, those who are good at vocab, they should have attempted the vocab part. That is simple understanding. Now, if I go deep into within that vocabulary part, you realize synonyms, antonyms, fill in the blanks, meaning of the word, meaning of the phrases and idioms, and spelling related one question. I will suggest this is not overall, if I consider the mass people, okay, I'll say this is not an easy part because the words were difficult, the options were also tricky, the options were also not straightforward. So the accuracy you might, as a student, you might have attempted in a very lesser time, but the accuracy might suffer in this area. That is my observation. The second part was a grammar part. Grammar part, on the contrast, it was something like that. You are able to understand the meaning of everything. What is the statement they have given? But the options were tricky. Okay, so you feel sometimes okay, there are two or more options looks to be correct. Everything looks to be correct. So options were tricky. Error identification questions. I'll say those whose school level basics are clear. They know all grammar rules. They know what is direct speech, indirect speech, active voice, passive voice. For them, it's a easy part. Those are not so sure about those rules and everything. For them, it's a moderate to difficult part. That's a simple understanding. Okay, but when you're attempting, basically what happens in these kind of questions, when you're attempting, you feel that okay, what I'm answering is the correct choice. Okay, so as I said, as a attempt, people would have taken a lesser time to attempt these questions, 9 questions, but how many of them are correct, that will you come to know when the response sheet is out. Fine. Verbal ability, no question, no parajumble question, no out of context, sentence jumble, nothing like that. So those 0 questions from the verbal ability part. And as far as the reading comprehension was concerned, there were 4 passages. Each passage had 5 questions. The approximate length of the passage was around 500 to 600 words. The student feedback is that the passages were, I'll say, it is of the easy category, means it is of the familiar topics. You read the passage, you understand what they are trying to say, and based on that, most of the questions were of the direct nature. So every student definitely gave a feedback about this as a easy to moderate for the RC passages, and they said those were manageable. But the only part is, if you're going in an order, that is question number 1, 2, 3, RCs were at the end and the VA part was at the start. So by a strategy, you would have decided, okay, I'll attempt the RC first, then probably your accuracy would have been good, because you can give the more time for those RC passages, and that will result also in more attempts and more accuracy also. Fine. So that's all about your all the 4 sections. Now if I look at the overall difficulty level of the paper, I will say it's a easy to moderate part. Okay, so uh, I'll say put it this way. Let's say somebody is a very well prepared student who has regularly attended the classes, understood the concepts well, practiced the questions well. He'll easily cross the 150 plus genuine attempts, I'll say. But if you're trying to aim the top colleges, okay, somebody is saying, okay, I'm looking for the top 4 colleges, then I will say 165 plus genuine attempt must be there. Plus so I've spoke to some students who are being consistently toppers. Some of them are attempted 180 attempts also. I'm talking genuine attempt. They gone through the questions and they mark some answer. Okay, so 180 plus is there. Again, out of that 180, how many will be correct? Like that I said, some questions in logic they solve and they mark something, but will that answer be correct? We don't know, because some information was missing, some error was there, so we don't know. So 180 plus genuine attempts. Again, consistent toppers people I have just spoke with, so they have 180 plus attempts also, but that is a rare case, I'll say. Okay, but paper overall difficulty was easy to moderate, number of attempts will go high, and as I know, as you also know, that the percentile is calculated slot wise. Okay, so if the average attempts go up for particular slot, then marks required to get that particular percentile will also go high. So if somebody is aiming, let's say 19.5 percentile, okay, so the cutoff for that will be higher compared to the other slot. The other slot will be equally easy, but like that, yesterday there was a slot where the input output questions were time consuming, they acted as a speed breakers. This was not the case in today's paper. Fine. So overall this year we are finding that the level of difficulty is slightly easy to moderate only. So cutoffs are going to be on a higher side only. Fine. So once your response sheet is out, please do calculate your scores and just check, have you analyzed that part also, that where you suffered in attempts part, or you suffered in the accuracy part, that your attempts were below the average attempts or your accuracy was below the average accuracy. Fine. And that analysis will also help you to attempt to do the second attempt part, because there will be a second attempt in the month of May. So this analysis of your paper will help you to plan your strategy for your second attempt. So that's all from my side. Thank you.